You are listening to the cycling podcast at Our Giro d'Italia, brought to you by iWalkUp, flexible loans built for small businesses. Today, we are in Col Basset.
Kotse citere kotse, kotse vicine, nus pigude shikora, nus pigude shikora, kotse citere kotse, kotse vicine, nus pigude shikora, se non lanciano le femmine.
Where are we, Lionel?
Well, we are on the Col Basset, in the shadow of Sestriere, and if we turn and look...
I like the little pause there, just checking your pronunciation.
Sestriere. Sestriere's in the shadow of us, Napalm. We're above Sestriere.
Oh, are we? Okay. Oh, well, there we are. So we're looking down on Sestriere.
Easy mistake to make
Sestriere,
from this vantage point.
Sestriere, of course, I mean, the scene of great rides by Fausto Coppi, Claudio Chiappucci, the controversial Lance Armstrong, of course, laid the foundation.
Controversial Claudio Chiappucci, the CCC. You'd have to say,
well, of course,
after that ride,
of course.
one of the most,
Yeah.
We can see, we can probably almost see Milan from here, can't we? We can probably see the spires of the Duomo in Milan from here.
The roof of the San Siro.
That reminds me, sorry.
I was going to say, Daniel, just quickly, before moving on from Chiappucci, if we ever get to do Our Giro again, Chiappucci's got to be on the course somehow.
Yes.
Anything. We've kind of ignored Chiappucci, but it's given ourselves something to return to.
Well, we've had Bugno, haven't we? We've got to redress that balance by having Chiappucci. Just as we mentioned Milan, on Sunday, if anyone's in Milan, there's a flash mob, a lovely initiative to promote sort of bike-friendly measures in the city. And I think the flash mob is called, or the initiative is called Milano Cambia Giro. Milan is changing Giro. So the real Giro should have arrived in Milan on Sunday. It's not, but this flash mob is. You can find information online about it on my Twitter feed. And all you'll need to take part is a rose. Not a maglia rosa, but just a rose.
Right. Well, if we look in the other direction, we would see Bardonecchia, the Monte Zoncalon, which gives a clue as to what our penultimate episode of our Giro is going to be all about.
And towering over Bardonecchia, Daniel, the Colle del Sommelier.
Yes.
And I have a question for you.
Yes.
You spoke about this a couple of years ago, but given the reputation that you're earning for yourself as a pretty brutal, sadistic race director, why did you not take us up the Colle del Sommelier at 2,900 metres?
Because, Rich, the road service is not quite good enough. You can get up there on a mountain bike. But
what about gravel bike?
Well, today's finish on the Col Basset on the Strada della Sieta, which is one of the great... I mean, if you're into that kind of thing, the old secret road or whatever they call it nowadays, I think it's probably one of the greatest places in Europe to do. It's about a 30-kilometre old military road that goes over a series of peaks and sort of ends in Sestriere. But the Col Basset is on that route. But the Col Sommelier is, I think, too rough.
Too rough, okay. Even for you. I mean, that tells its own story.
I think so.
What have we got coming up today then, Lionel?
Well, we're looking back a couple of years to the final Friday of the 2018 Giro, when Chris Froome really turned the race upside down and emptied it out all over the mountains, didn't he? And clinched the pink jersey. Simon Yates was on the verge of cracking anyway, but that was the final blow to his hopes of winning a Giro that he'd led for so long. And we're going to look back at that with a fantastically made package of interviews that you've gathered, Richard, with Chris Froome, Simon Yates, Tom Dumoulin, Dave Brailsford, Chris Juul Jensen, a couple of others in there as well. And that, we'll set that up and then react to what we've heard, I think.
Just before the tale of the Tapa today, Lionel, a bit of housekeeping. First thing to say is that Stacey Snyder's second batch of mugs and cappuccino sets went on sale on Wednesday. It sold out in 7 minutes this time. It means that $3,652.60 have been raised through the sales of those beautiful objects for the Scuola Ciclismo Ceni. That's great news, and we'll make sure that money gets to them as quickly as possible. Maybe ask Marco Pinotti to present it, some kind of ceremonial large check and get a photograph of that. That's before we've added in the money from the sale of the Giro and Baby Giro wine by Divine Cellars. And there have been one or two other donations from listeners which have been very kind of you to make and gratefully received. And as we heard a couple of nights ago, the cycling school in Chennai are planning to use the money to put on a couple of events towards the end of the year. So we'll keep you posted on news of them. The other bit of news is that we have unveiled a new range of clothing. That went out. The news of that went out last night in conjunction with Katusha, a name that will be familiar to you all. Started off as a Russian team about just over 10 years ago, now a Swiss clothing company, and they've produced beautiful cycling podcast t-shirts and jerseys. They're really, really nice, and we hope you like them as much as we do. Some of the phrases and words
nonsense
made infamous by the podcast feature in the design of the t-shirt. Really, really lovely. Can't wait to get my hands on some of that kit, and it's available now. If you go to thecyclingpodcast.com/shop, you can certainly reserve it at the moment. It's not quite available yet, but you can put your name down for some of that stuff. If you want somebody to try Katusha's clothing, you can get 10% off across the range if you use the code KTCP at the checkout.
Oh, don't ask me to remember that one.
No. Details of all of this in the episode notes. But can we have the tail of the tapper, please, Lionel?
Well, we can, but first, just talking of jerseys, there's still time for everyone to vote in the final of the Coppa Italia of cycling jerseys. This has been running all week to a frenzied competition. Over 12,000 votes cast so far, and we're down to the final, probably a predictable final, really. It's the classic Bianchi blue against Molteni's kind of orange and brown curtain affair, sort of mid-70s three-piece suite. I can't believe the popularity
this is like when
of
Italy,
that, really.
Well, this is like when Italy, as we heard earlier in the Giro, when Italy were knocked out of the Italian 90 World Cup, that was a disgrace, and Mappe being knocked out in the semi-final is also an absolute disgrace.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
I'd like to see a final run-off, though, next week, Lionel, with whoever wins that, hopefully Bianchi, up against the new cycling podcast jersey for Champion of Champions.
That's a great idea, like the sort of European Super Cup afterwards. Yeah, why not? Yeah, the Molteni orange and brown jersey, I just do not get it. I mean, if Eddie Merckx hadn't worn that, no one would like it at all. It reminds me of sort of the sort of colour that cars were in 1977.
I also just think of huge crates of bologna and spam being dumped into the ocean, which is allegedly what happened when the Molteni company were exposed sometime in the mid-70s.
Oh dear. Was it good quality sausages?
No, I don't think it was.
No, was it kind of budgety?
Not particularly. We should do a whole episode on that one day, but not today.
Budget sausages, oh dear.
Make a kilometre zero where we knock up some Molteni salami in a Salvarani kitchen. Anyway, the Tale of the Tapper, stage 20. Now, is this the Queen stage, Daniel?
I don't really subscribe to the whole Queen stage thing, because people
always
talk about it as though it's an official thing that's been anointed as the Queen stage, when it's never been an official a sort of a denomination for a stage, has it? It's quite a nouveau invention.
Yeah, it's sort of for people who want to know which one is absolutely unmissable. I mean, it looks pretty tough to me. 5,000 metres of climbing over the Agnello, the Izoard, so ducking into France a bit, Mont Genèvre, and then this climb up to the Col Basset. And if you're riding on the RGT platform, then you will be doing Mont Genèvre and the Col Basset. I mean, that is a really, really tough day for the penultimate stage of the Giro.
The other thing, Napalm, if I can just add, is that I always feel uncomfortable about nominating a stage that's not in the Dolomites as the Queen stage of the Giro, because to me the Dolomites that's where the Giro's soul is as far as mountains is concerned.
Okay.
Mountains are concerned.
Well, fair point. If you are riding on the RGT cycling platform, or if you're not, whether you've ridden every day or whether you've only done one or two, or if you've yet to make your debut in Our Giro, do join us tomorrow morning, Sunday, 10 o'clock UK time. Richard and I will be on the start line for the final stage. We're doing the 16-kilometre time trial course into Milan. I'm absolutely pinging.
Good of Daniel to give us a good old British 10-mile time trial to finish things off.
What's the course code, Daniel?
Up and down a a dual carriageway into Milan.
Yeah, the course code OURG1RO is the course code for the final stage. Anyway, over to the course to see how Richard's getting on the Col Basset.
Well, scenes reminiscent of the 2004 Tour de France this morning round our place. And Iban Mayo trying to abandon and being basically forced back onto his bike by his directors and teammates. The difference this time was I won the battle. No stage 20 for me today in Our Giro. But I am on my bike in the great outdoors, and it's very pleasant indeed. I will be back in the sweat box tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. British time for the 10-mile time trial that Daniele Fribrancini has generously laid on to finish Our Giro. Hope to see as many of you out there on the virtual road as possible. In the meantime, I'm going to enjoy the fresh air.
You are listening to the Cycling Podcast at Our Giro d'Italia, brought to you by iWalkup, flexible loans built for small businesses. iwoca.co.uk.
My name is James Turner. I am the IT manager at iWalker. I love the fact that iWalker does get involved in not just sort of straight business activities. And iWalker as a company, we see ourselves very much as an enabler for other small businesses. And so I do see the sort of the sporting angle of things being an enabler to society, if you will. As very much more sort of just an extension on that mission, if you will. We do have on staff quite a few talented athletes from many different sports, but personally, sort of being very involved in cycling myself, selfishly, I really enjoyed that sort of announcement.
Thanks very much to our headline sponsor, iWalka, who have got us, or helped to get us through this 3 weeks. We heard there from James Turner of iWalka himself. I gather a very accomplished cyclist, and as many people at iWalka are, they're a very cycling-friendly company. And when we went to the offices, Lionel, we saw lots of bikes, didn't we?
We did.
And
yeah,
they have made supporting cycling one of their big things, as well as the cycling podcast. They sponsor the Kendal Cycle Club, of course. So a big thanks to iWalka.
Giro Dream Team with Ciro Scognamiglio.
Every great team has a great sport director. I choose simply the best one, Giuseppe Martinelli. Do you understand? He repeats very often when he speaks. But when Beppe speaks, as a matter of fact, I always understand everything. He won 9 Grand Tours from Dakar with several riders, from Marco Pantani to Vincenzo Nibali, but mainly is always kind to answer questions and give his vision of the race. And this vision of the race is always the best vision. Do you understand?
So, chaps, Beppe Martinelli is the DS of Ciro's Dream Team. A fairly conventional choice in the sense that Martinelli has got the best Giro record of any direct sportive. I think he won it with Pantani, Garzelli, Simoni, Cunego, Contador, Nibali. Very impressive. The nickname that Ciro referred to there, that he and I use, Hai capito, is probably loses something in translation. So it literally means, do you understand? It's a sort of affectation that Martinelli has pretty much at the end of every sentence. He says, Hai capito, do you understand? Which is quite endearing. But
I don't envy him his task in moulding Ciro's selection of riders into any kind of.
Well, if anyone can do
unit.
it, he can do it, I suppose. Yeah,
I would suggest that he can.
Particularly,
I would suggest that's going to be very difficult indeed.
There could be shades of the 2004 Giro with Cunego and Simoni with the famous Bastardo tirade, Simoni's famous Bastardo tirade. I'll never forget, there was a press conference on the final morning of the race that year. Saeco, that was the team press conference, and I remember going in there and seeing Simone sort of demolishing a bowl of Weetabix, sort of stabbing the Weetabix angrily with a spoon as the media poured into the hotel, and they only had eyes for, you know, this bright-eyed 22-year-old Cunego who was the coming man.
Amarcord. I remember.
I'm happy. Like the ride was crazy. It was. The plane was crazy, the World Day was crazy, and it was kind of blackballed situation, but...
Did Chris tell you that he wanted you to set him up in the way that he did at that point in the race?
Yeah, when I passed my turn, he told me faster, and I was like, whoa, the climb is really long, but my race is finished then, so I went fast, and I was surprised he went to go so fast with... So long, but yeah, he did something really very special today.
Where are we, Daniel?
Well, amazing scenes, Rich, because we're in a bar in Bardonecchia, which I was last in 2014. And do you know who else was here that day, just on the table next to me?
Yes, I do, because you told me a few minutes ago.
Is it in any way relevant to today's stage? It is slightly relevant. It was David Walsh and the Team Sky doctor, Richard Freeman. It's slightly relevant to the reaction to today's stage, because I know some people will have seen Chris Froome pull off one of the rides of the century. I mean, this century is only 18 years old.
I think the last 2 centuries.
Well, and people will some people will feel slightly uneasy.
They will, but we heard at the start there from his teammate Kenny Ellison, who put in a pretty incredible ride himself to set Chris Froome up for his attack. About 7 or 8 kilometres from the top of the Finestre, Froome took off. It was 80 kilometres of the stage still to go, and you were among the people looking at that, shaking your head, wondering what on earth was going on.
Yeah, I thought he was too greedy. I thought at that point he should have been dealing with one adversary at a time. He'd only just dealt with Simon Yates, and he sort of moved along the line and was preoccupied with taking Tom Dumoulin out of the race as well, which I didn't think he needed to do. I thought there were enough interests in the small group that he was in. There were enough people who were keen to, at that point, distance Domenico Pozzovivo, who was losing ground, that he could have surfed that group.
Are you saying he got it wrong?
Well, he could have. He could have
very brave.
Well, he could have used them in the valley, and he probably would have been 20 minutes ahead tonight.
Chris Froome got that all wrong today. Well, today's Amarcord sets us up nicely, doesn't it, for what we're going to be talking about and hearing about today, which is the famous stage 19 of the 2018 Giro d'Italia, when it was a Giro, a thrilling Giro to be at, to follow. Simon Yates was absolutely rampant for 2.5 weeks, pretty much. We did hear last week in the episode with Max Schachmann, who won at Prato Nervoso, that stage was also the first sign that Simon Yates was weakening, and that was stage 18, so it came just before stage 19, which was an absolute brute. And, well, we know what happened. Chris Froome was set up by his team. Kenny Ellison, his little pocket French teammate, did an incredible job on the Finestre, and Froome attacked with 80-odd kilometres left of the stage to go, got away on his own, had a decent gap over the top of the climb, and then an even bigger gap at the foot of the descent, and it was, the race was on then. Tom Dumoulin was chasing behind with a few others, but there was a lack of cohesion there. Froome was totally committed to what he was trying to pull off, which was a feat kind of not quite in the same league as Fausto Coppi in 1949, a stage that we talked about a couple of days, 192 kilometres on his own to Pinerolo. Coppi, this wasn't quite in that league, but nevertheless, we don't see many exploits like this in modern professional cycling. An 80-kilometre solo break that won him the Giro.
Well, let's not forget that Chris Froome came into this Giro under something of a cloud, didn't he? Because in December 2017, there was a case of excessive salbutamol found in a sample taken at a in a dope control, and that case was still unresolved as the Giro was approaching, and there were calls for him not to start the race. And then things went from kind of bad to worse for him in Jerusalem, because he crashed while checking out the course for the opening time trial on day one of the Giro, and bashed himself up a bit and finished only 21st in that time trial. Then had a bit of a shocker through the first 9 days of the race, didn't he? Didn't look great on the climb to Etna. That was the day, of course, that Esteban Chavez and Simon Yates did the 1-2 at the top of Mount Etna. It looked even worse on the climb to Gran Sasso d'Italia on stage 9 just before the first rest day, and really at that point the Giro looked to be over for Chris Froome. And then we came to a few days later, towards the end of the second week. He won, of course, on Monte Zoncalon, but going into this stage 19 was still over 3 minutes behind Yates. And although there was a sense that perhaps Yates was weakening and 2 very tough stages still to go, we've kind of applied that retrospectively in a way, this sense that Yates was starting to suffer, but no one expected Chris Froome to turn the race on its head in quite such a dramatic fashion as he did.
So let's go back to 2018 and the Giro d'Italia and hear about the race and stage 19 in particular, in the words of Chris Froome, Dave Brailsford, Tom Dumoulin, Simon Yates, his teammate Chris Juul Jensen and his sports director Matt White. We also hear briefly from Kenny Elissonde and Sebastian Reichenbach.
We've got this big elaborate plan, but there are absolutely no guarantees it's going to work out, and it could have just blown up in my face really badly.
Yeah, going up the Finestra, I was just kind of in a world of my own, really, just surviving.
I decided I needed help, and then I decided to wait for Reichenbach. It turned out to be that they were not as much of a help as I thought they would be.
You plan those things, 100 times, and they come off once or twice in your career, I guess.
It's the Giro d'Italia, 101st edition of the Tour of Italy, and for the first time ever, it starts outside the boundaries of Europe. Yes, we're in Jerusalem.
I think I went into the race not really knowing exactly where I was at. I mean, I was feeling good. The numbers were good in training, but it wasn't. I didn't have the same feeling as I'd normally have going into a Tour de France with wins under my belt and sort of all the confidence in the world kind of thing.
I guess going into the race, there was quite a lot of ambition around it.
I did go in with a few question marks.
The cycling world has woken up on Wednesday to the news that 4-time Tour de France winner Chris Froome has failed a drugs test.
4-time Tour de France winner Chris Froome says cycling's world governing body are right to ask questions about his adverse drugs test. The Team Sky rider had twice the allowed level of legal asthma drug salbutamol in his urine.
I mean, it definitely it was a big factor for me coming into the race. I think it certainly played a role in my preparation, I think, for the Giro, that I wasn't quite as focused as I would want to have been. And I mean, naturally, it pulled a lot of my attention. But I think once I got into the race and I was alongside riders who would give me a lot of comfort and would come up next to me and say, "Hey man, listen, I wish you all the best and I believe in you," and all this kind of stuff. So that was nice to have that sort of camaraderie and support from other riders. I think also racing on the roads in Italy. I mean, there's great support for all the riders from the Italian fans, and that also made a big difference. I think just being accepted in the group and not feeling as if I was being turned into a villain at that point was really welcome. I was still optimistic. I was optimistic about my chances.
It hasn't gone well from the off because Chris Froome crashed on a sighting run, and indeed he took a real smack from the road surface.
I did hit the ground hard. Yeah, it was just one of those crashes that I got up from, and I could feel straight away, ouch, that wasn't just skin on the road there. It felt as if I'd really hurt that right side of my body actually on that fall. My knee had swollen up quite a bit and was painful as well. It was sore. It was bruised quite deeply, I think. So it was sore to push on in the days that followed. But even in that time trial that afternoon, I mean, I put on a brave face and I tried to tell myself it was okay. But I was getting around the course, but I wasn't in the race to try and win.
You know, the crash in Jerusalem in the warm-up for the time trial had a major impact on that race, certainly for Chris and us as a team. And on the one hand, I mean, a rider of lesser tenacity, I think, would have really let that get them down, because that was a major stack. He hurt himself in that crash. There's no doubt about it. And for a lot of people, they thought, right, okay, well, it's just not going to happen from coming back from this level of injury, really. But he didn't let his head drop.
I was still upbeat. I mean, okay, I lost a little bit of time in the time trial that afternoon, but it wasn't. I knew how much Grand Tours could change, and I still sort of kept my head on, and I still approached the race as if I hadn't lost any time, and I was still in it, trying to win it. But obviously, as the race went on, and my right knee didn't feel any better. It was I was still hurting getting around some of the stages.
Froome still out on course. Oh my goodness, we're shaking our heads and he's shaking his, and it's going to be more time. He ships Sean.
There was one point in that first week where it was early on in the stage. I think it was 20-30 k's into a stage, and the break hadn't yet gone, and I literally thought I was going to be dropped from the peloton on my own, and that would be the end of the race for me, because I mean, 20-30 k's into a stage, getting dropped, there's no chance of getting back, really. I can't remember which stage it was exactly, but I literally remember getting on the bus that day and saying to the guys that this was almost the end of the end of the Giro for me that day. And it wasn't a particularly hard stage. It was just quite a straightforward stage.
It's a great story, isn't it, the Giro? Because I think everybody will look at stage 19 and think, wow, that was an incredible feat, and he won it there. I think there's a lot of that race that he won at the very start in the first few days, by just being able to hang on in there and stick with it as he was getting over, you know, just recovering from that crash, to be honest.
Missed the helicopter that all the riders had got onto to try and save time and increase recovery time. I think we also missed the first ferry as well, because it's taken so long to finish up at anti-doping. I didn't get down until quite late, but that's just one of those things. I mean, I didn't finish very high up on that stage. I think I just hung on to the lead group and sort of masked my weaknesses as well as I could on that stage, but didn't end up losing much, I don't think, by the finish. But I think I still got chosen for a random control at the top, which took the best part of 2-3 hours for me to actually produce a urine sample. It just felt like it was just another one of those things that I'd obviously be traveling all through the night to get to the hotel at sort of 2-3 in the morning or something on the back of that. There's just another one of those things that was just like, this Giro is not going to plan so far.
And there's a crash. We knew there could be crashes. Chris Froome is down. What poles as well?
That wasn't too heavy at all. I mean, it was a very low speed, and I didn't fall that hard. But it just round a switchback, I lost my wheel. My back wheel went round a corner, and it just again, it was just another sort of blow that on that right side again, I seem to remember that I remember thinking I just don't need any more of this bad luck at this point. Things just and there were moments, I think, as well in the first 10 days where if there was a little split towards the end, I'd be on the wrong side of it. I was losing time in places I wouldn't normally lose time, and it just wasn't shaping out to be the race I thought I was able to put together, obviously. It was tough on the mind. It was tough mentally to sort of keep morale up and to keep fighting for the race as if I was in it still for the victory. But I think somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew that this is a Grand Tour and we're still in the first half. So no matter what happens here, things can still change. And I sort of kept that mentality, even though things really weren't going that well in the first half.
I think what summed up, one of the memories I've got from that race was having David de la Cruz on his first Grand Tour, I think it was, with Chris, and he sat opposite him on the bus. And I think the first rest day or the second rest day, I kind of sit down with most of the riders, sat down with him, said, how are you doing? What are you learning? What are you picking up? And he said, well, I'll tell you what I've learned the most. And he said, I'd always watched Chris and, when he'd won races, and I thought, wow, I'm suffering so much in this race every day just to hang on and, just kind of get dropped at the end or just fighting at the end for on the stages. And I see Chris winning. And I always assumed it was quite easy for him. It was easier for him doing what he was doing than it was for me. And he said, I've watched him here. And he said, he's come in and he's all battered. He's been getting dropped on stages he should not normally be getting dropped on, with 20 guys going up ahead of him maybe when there's he would never expect that to happen normally. And he comes back and he's maybe lost half a minute or a minute. And he comes back on the bus and said, I don't know what to say to him. I don't know what to say. Well, gee, because he must be, if that was me, I'd be devastated. My head would drop and I'd be really struggling. And yet, I sort of turn around and ask him if he's all right. And the thing that I've learned is he turns around and he goes, yeah, I'm all right. Yeah. I tell you what, though, I'm going to have him tomorrow. And he said that ability I'm going to get him tomorrow. And that really struck a chord with David de la Cruz, and him sort of reciting that to me in the way that he did, I think was a really good little anecdote, if you like, which sums Chris Froome up. Because he did, he is a never say die character, and then whilst everybody else is going, okay, this is a tough one now, he's still pretty confident and he's still up for it, and he's still, his ability to bounce back is phenomenal.
Not sure if it was something that I was doing for my teammates or more for myself, even just to get myself through it. That by telling myself that I could still come back into the race, even having lost whatever it was at that point. Would have been a couple minutes down at least. But yeah, I mean the team were great. I can't remember the guys ever really not supporting me or going off and doing their own thing. I mean, they still carried on, even though I was hemorrhaging time. They were still riding for me, still doing whatever they could to keep me up there every day. And I think that also kept me honest and kept my head in the game, really.
We'd won various Grand Tours in various different ways, but one of the things was, you've got to be careful about how you spend your energy. And if you really, really, you've only got so much, and you've got to make sure that you've got it for that final week. And I think when we saw what Simon was doing, I mean, he was riding so well. I mean, he was in some of those stages just head and shoulders above the rest. But he was going deep, and he was going deep often, and maybe going deep sometimes in areas where he could understand he was trying to accumulate, big gap. But we're thinking, okay, that is, he's going to have to pay for this at some point. And if he continues this all the way through, then chapeau, he's like a head and shoulders best rider in the race by a long, long way. And he's done something that we haven't quite seen before. So on the one hand, you're seeing this kind of repeating every day and thinking, wow, okay. But equally in the back of your mind, you're thinking, this is the potential probability of him sustaining this all the way through is quite small.
Yeah, I mean, he started the race so well. I mean, he was just firing on all cylinders. You could see how strong he was. He was just effortlessly, or seemingly effortlessly, riding away from everyone, and he was incredible.
And here comes Simon Yates. Simon Yates is going to take a stage victory here. The smile on his face already. The smiling assassin has come home. He's had one shot. It's the first time he's been in front all day. And you know what? You only have to be in front once, and that is at the line. What a brilliant ride this has been by Simon Yates. More than that, it's about timing. And maybe this is his time. 125 metres to go. And Simon Yates, I believe, is going to give that grin that we're now familiar with. Punch the air. He's beaten Dumoulin. He's beaten the field again. Will he be our champion in waiting?
Quite often when you see a rider doing that, you do think, oof, he's come into this obviously pinging, but will he be able to hold that for 3 weeks? And it was just that with Simon, it was that question of every day going into a big stage, like, has he still got it? Has he still got it? Has he still got it? And I mean, practically 2.5 weeks in, it looked as if he had it absolutely wrapped up. But yeah, those last few days for him, the wheels must have just fallen off completely.
It's Chris Froome to turn right after 5 hours and 24 minutes of racing. At the minute, he has a minute lead over the Maglia Rosa, but look at the power of the pink jersey.
When I went into Zoncalon, I mean, I knew the climb well. I'd reconned it just before the Giro, and it was a climb I definitely earmarked that I wanted to win up there. And I almost felt as if I was able to win up there, it might have redeemed how badly I was doing on the general classification. So I went into the stage with the mentality of, I'm going to give it absolutely 110% today, and regardless of what's going to happen tomorrow, if I do that. And I did. I mean, Wout helped me set a really high tempo on the climb, and I found one of the steeper pitches on the climb and went for it and just got a small gap over the guys behind me, and I was obviously getting time checks all the way up. That Simon was just a few seconds behind me, but that was all I needed. So I just fought as hard as I could, obviously, to hold on to those few seconds, and did manage to hold him off all the way up until the top.
Froome, hands on the tops, he's grabbing that bike for dear life as he spins away. Behind, gliding away, it's Simon Yates, who I don't think is going to get there now. Chris Froome's going to pull away one final time, and I think it's going to be a huge confidence-boosting stage win for him and for Team Sky. Froome turns the corner. This was unthinkable a few days ago. The confidence boost is there. It's launch pad for Chris Froome as he is back in the Giro d'Italia. Stage win for him, stage win for Sky. But in the meantime, Simon Yates keeps the pink jersey and extends his lead.
But I did turn myself absolutely inside out, and I remember thinking I remember in almost immediately after the stage, I remember thinking I wanted to go and speak to Simon and almost ask him what was he doing chasing me so hard for the stage win when he had the pink jersey. And I remember thinking, if I was in a leader's jersey at this point, I don't think I would have turned myself that or flogged myself that hard to catch someone who's not really in the GC anymore. And I remember thinking that's he's either feeling so good that he's got extra energy to be able to do these kind of efforts, or it's inexperience. And he's not thinking about the bigger picture here, chasing someone who's 3 minutes back, for example. Because I remember the next day I felt terrible. I felt nailed, and the weather was nasty, and the legs just felt like cement. And I remember coming to to final, towards the final, and just watching everyone ride away from me. So I mean, it was tough after the Zoncalon to then go into the next day and then lose a chunk more time again.
Chute à l'arrière du peloton, cycling podcast team car at the back of the pack, please.
That's Seb PK interrupting our Giro coverage to remind me to tell you that tonight's episode is sponsored by LACA. LACA is a community of cyclists working together to ensure their bikes and equipment in the event of damage or loss, ensuring that the premiums are lower and the payouts in the event of a claim are swifter. LACA are not fazed by expensive kit or bikes. They know their onions. Go to laca.co.uk for more information. That's lak.co.uk for more information. But don't take our word for it. Let's hear from a satisfied LACA customer.
Hi, my name's Will Salisbury and I'm an amateur cyclist. Got into it recently. I do a lot of riding on the road, and I suppose in the last 12 months I've started racing on the track and on the road as well. So I've been a customer for about 2 or 3 months, and I was cleaning my bike one day and I noticed that I'd got a crack in my frame. So I went straight on the retailer's website and pursued it through a warranty issue. Initially got in contact with LACA to basically just say, this is what's happened. And they were like, well, look, go down the warranty route and just keep us posted all the way along. Everyone I spoke to was really proactive and helpful. Unfortunately, it came back from the retailers that they deemed it as a crash rather than the frame actually failing. So I forwarded the email on to the insurers, and within a day, half a day, they'd got back to me and said, well, look, not to worry about it. Let us take over from here. We'll speak to the retailers. And then actually they ended up covering the replacement frame and then getting the bike built up and sorting me out with a hire bike in the interim. And they couldn't have been more helpful, to be honest, in terms of checking to make sure that I was all okay, everything. I was still on the road riding, and that when any payments did need to be made, they basically just got in contact with me and said, look, if you're happy to pay and we'll reimburse you, or they were happy to contact those people that needed contacting directly to pay. So yeah, very, very impressive.
If this sounds like the kind of insurance you'd like for your bikes and equipment, go to laca.co.uk. New customers get £10 off their LACA insurance when they go to laca.co.uk and use the code PODCAST. That's the code PODCAST at laca.co.uk, laka.co.uk.
So we had a rest day and the time trial coming, and I think that rest day was really what I needed just to pick me up again and to regather myself after that big Zoncalon effort. And then that bad day in the bad weather where I lost time again the day after Zoncalon.
2018 I'll never forget, that's for sure. I think that the year we went into that race with 2 leaders, with Esteban and Simon, they were both moving very well that first week of the race. And then obviously Esteban dropped away there after the second rest day, after the first rest day. And then and Simon just went on to strength stronger and stronger and winning multiple stages along the way.
Yeah, actually 2.5 weeks of Giro. It was just flying, Simon Yates, and I was nowhere near his level. So I was just limiting losses every day.
I went into the time trial, I think, optimistic and feeling good, and I think I rode I can't really remember the results, but I think I rode a decent-ish time. But more than anything, I think I was surprised at Simon again, that he rode such a good time trial, not losing really nearly as much as what everyone expected him to lose against Dumoulin, who seemed to be closing in on him on the time trial.
Actually, the first day in Jerusalem, it was my best day. I won it, and even the second longer TT, it was kind of hilly at the end, and it would be a TT that would suit me normally really well. But I was just tired and not at my best, and I don't even know what I was, maybe 4th or 5th, but I was nowhere near my best level, and I was just limiting losses every day.
yeah, we were very close with winning that race. We had a tactic that we needed to take time whenever we could. We weren't confident, or we certainly weren't sure where Simon's time trialling ability was compared to the likes of Froome and Dumoulin.
I think the first chink sort of came in a time trial. He looked very leggy in the time trial to us, and we thought, okay, he's starting to feel this.
The pink jersey is losing terrain, and this could be interesting because Dumoulin is following Monte Zoncalon. The pink jersey has shown some little crack.
That was where the cracks began to show, I think, for Simon, because there was a bit of excitement towards the top of that climb and a few attacks, and all of a sudden Simon just wasn't there anymore. He wasn't on the wheel, and I think that was that sort of opened up that whole question of, hold on, has he suddenly got sick, or is he just running out of steam at this point, because he's been able to follow everyone's attacks up until now, and this was the first time that he wasn't able to follow, and he didn't lose much, but it was enough just to, I think, show everyone that there was a slight weakness, and that was enough to give people hope. And I think that changed my mentality completely for that next day.
And hence the sort of all-in type of approach, really, to the last block, where it really was all or nothing. And we decided, and I think Chris decided himself that at 3 minutes, wherever he was down, there was nothing to lose. It's one of those situations where he didn't have to ride conservatively. He could throw the kitchen sink at it and see what happened, basically. And that proved to be quite decisive, I think.
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, there was a sense of unease, obviously, but it was also it was also the feeling of it's out of our control in a way, because stage 18. I mean, again, the beauty of pro cycling, but especially of doing a Grand Tours, there's so many things that can't be explained. I mean. Also the idea of you do a 3-week Grand Tour, and personally I come out of it better than when I started, which makes no sense either. But you hear a lot of riders talk about that. But also a guy like Simon, he just dominated for so many stages, and then it was like flicking a switch, when you saw it from the outside, that all of a sudden it was just, the magic was gone.
On Finestra on stage 19, finishing up in Bardonecchia, and it just made me think this is probably one of the hardest stages of the race. It's just 3 climbs, 3 descents, and I just thought, this is I've got to go for it here. I've got to go all in on this stage. And initially, when we were planning for it, we thought, well, I'll try and reduce it down to a smaller group and try and ride with guys like Dumoulin, Pozzovivo to the finish. But then when I slept on it, and I think the morning of the race, I remember saying to my wife Michelle, Tim Kerrison and Nicholas Portal, discussing with them the possibility of actually just going on my own. I sort of figured one person working full gas will always work better than 3 or 4 who aren't necessarily that keen on working together. And I remember thinking, actually, this would be a perfect course just to go for it on my own, because there's not that much flat. It's just either climbing or descending. So a group of 3 or 4 isn't necessarily going to have much terrain where they can really benefit. I can remember speaking to Nico about it, and I remember his eyes lighting up, like he just thought this was great. I think he, and by seeing that reaction from him, almost, I think, egged me on even further to make sure I'd pull it off, and gave me the confidence that this was a move that sort of had his blessing, if you like.
Well, I think the things that added up were the length of the climb, as in time, so it's one of the longest climbs in terms of time that the pros will do. It's quite a long, it's a long effort. The run into the climb was different to what you'd normally expect. And the fact that we could get to that climb, pretty confident that we're going to have a lot of the team there. So you could sort of preempt the run in and the beginning of the climb. And I guess if you go, if you take it, I think it was an hour and a bit, wasn't it? An hour and a couple of minutes. If you ride at your limit, the top guys ride at their limit for that length of time, you're only going to have one or two guys left. That's just physiology, so how it is basically. So the aim was to make that climb as hard as we could for as long as we could, and for Chris to go as hard as he could, as early as he could, and sustain that for as long as he could. And the chances were that he's going to have, only a couple of people with him maybe at the top. And as it turned out, he had nobody with him at the top.
And going into the stage, we obviously planned, set out a whole fueling plan, because it was going to be a massive day on the bike. So to try and get as many carbs in as possible, and we had, in order to do that, we had to put 20 people out on the route to be able to get bottles and gels and food at certain points, and it just turned into this massive planning session for what was going to be the biggest day of the Giro.
Pow! Chris Froome decides to stick one on absolutely everybody. Oh, and is it going to be a knockout blow? This is outstanding run right now. We've still got 80 kilometres to go, don't forget. Chris Froome is taking advantage here. Well, my goodness, is he going to be taking the mick? To be honest, when he goes over the top, how long is he prepared to be isolated?
We had planned it. We had thought very carefully about the fueling and the strategy and the feeding and the how I was going to do it and what to do, and the bit where, who's going to do what in the train, and Kenny doing his last little sprint to launch him, etc. And
I'm happy. The ride was crazy. It was the plane was crazy. The world day was crazy, and it was kind of blackballed situation. But
did Chris tell you that he wanted you to set him up in the way that he did at that point in the race?
Yeah, when I passed my turn, he told me faster, and I was like, whoa, the climb is really long, but my race is finished then. So I went fast, and I was surprised he went to go so fast with but yeah, he did something really very special today.
I mean, we've got this big elaborate plan, but I mean, there are absolutely no guarantees it's gonna work out, and it could have just blown up in my face really badly, and I could have been dropped 50 k's out with no teammates if it had backfired. But so I think I was sort of quietly nervous, but also excited, because I knew this was my one chance to sort of redeem myself in the race and to try and get back some of the time I'd lost.
I think one of the differences there where we didn't control it was when the brake had gone originally, and they caught the brake before the foot of the climb. And so when he did go over the top, he was the first over the top, and there was nobody ahead of him. He wasn't catching anybody up. There wasn't a brake as such to ride with, or other riders to drop back, or people to bridge across to. And I think that was quite strategically, I think that was quite important.
I was riding as if it was a time trial. I mean, I was riding sort of at a pace that was maybe just below what I knew I could sustain for the best part of 2.5 hours. So everything was below thresholds, or below my thresholds, but I had to keep that pace as steady and as high as I could hold it, basically.
We talked a lot about if he did go over the top, if he was on his own, what would he do? And if he was with Dumoulin, for example, what would he do? Would he ride and keep going, and Dumoulin would have been ahead of him maybe on GC? Or would he sit on Dumoulin and just wait and everybody could? What would we do in those kind of different scenarios? And one of the things that he spoke about with Tim was that, they do these sort of sustained aerobic power efforts in training, which are quite long, where they ride really on the limit for quite a long period of time. And they talked about, if you do get over the top on your own, ride it in that style. Don't ride as if you're away from everybody else and try and stay away. Don't ride just to stay away from the group behind. Ride this kind of high aerobic power type effort, and that'll sustain the best you can be for as long as you can go. Ride it in that style. And that's what he did in effect. So once he was away, he was just going to manage his effort, and he can do it brilliantly. So he just managed his effort consistently and sort of spread the effort across the remainder of the distance rather than having a big spike and dying.
Real time gap was at the top of the Finestra. I think that was just under a minute or somewhere around there, and so that was what I considered was a good start. But I remember being blown away once I'd got down to and on the descents I did go for it. I did push on a bit. I was trying to watch the motorbike in front of me to see what lines he was taking to try and basically figure out how severe the corners were and how fast I could go into the corners. I probably did take a few risks down there, and I can remember getting down to the bottom of the climb and hearing that I had an extra 30 or 45 seconds from just the descent section, and I just remember being blown away at that and thinking, hold on, these guys have lost a minute uphill, they've lost another 45 seconds down. If I can repeat that again on the next climb, I'm going to be almost 3 minutes ahead. So that gave me a lot of confidence, and definitely spurred me on.
Here we go. Chris Froome has just moved in to the virtual pink jersey. As it stands, if the stage were to finish now, this man, incredibly so, would lead.
Froome was much better than me the last week. He showed that already on Zoncalon, and then on the Finestra day, of course. And I was just hanging on as long as possible. So eventually I found myself, I think, maybe close to a minute back on Froome on top of Finestra. And I thought, if I lost a minute on a few kilometers of climbing, and I was completely cracked already coming to the top. So I thought, if I continue now with Pinot, and I think Carapaz was still there with the three of us, if we continue with the three of us, they will for sure not help me, and it would be just a battle one-on-one. And he showed that in a few kilometers he put already a minute on me. So if I would go one-on-one, I will definitely lose much more and end up completely cracked also for the next day. So I thought that was not a good choice to make, to go full behind him on my own.
And I think it was at that point where Nico first came up to me with the car, because they didn't have the cars on Finestra. And I can remember Nico coming up in the car and being like, okay, you've done the first part. Now you've got away. You've done the hard part. Now you just need to focus. You just focus on your effort, and there's no going back now. You've gone all in, and this is it. Now you have to make it work. So we were just trying to fuel as much as I could, literally just taking on as much fluid and sugars and gels and everything else that I could.
You plan those things, I don't know, 100 times, and they come off once or twice in your career, I guess, don't they? And it just so happened that was the day that we planned it, and it went like clockwork, basically.
I decided I needed help, and then I decided to wait for Reichenbach. So Pinot and Reichenbach would both help me in the chase, and we would be with at least 3.
But it just looked as if there was just no real coordination in that back group. And I mean, they were trying to decide if they should wait for Reichenbach, and try and decide if Pinot should ease up for Reichenbach and try and use him in the valleys.
Behind, I think they made when they didn't chase hard on the descent, and they waited for what's his name to come back, Reichenbach, wasn't it, to come back, and expected him to pull. I think that's where they made a. I think they worked on the law of averages. I think normally in that situation with those guys behind, teammate comes up, pulls, they all work together. 9 times out of 10, I think they'd probably think, okay, well, we're going to be capable of bringing this back. It'll come back. But on this time, that a bit of hesitation amongst them, and they didn't fully commit, did they, on the descents in particular? And I think they just got too far.
Yeah, eventually it turned out to be that they were probably not as much of a help as I thought they would be. So I lost a lot of time waiting in the downhills, and I probably lost more than I would gain on the flatter part.
It's not a surprise he said what he said. I've always had problems on descents, and obviously the accidents I've had recently haven't improved matters. That said, I don't think if Dumoulin had been alone with Thibaut, he would have gained more time. It's not as though they waited long for me at the bottom of the second descent. I can also understand that he was very frustrated to have to do all of the work, or to share it with me. I get that.
So eventually, if you look back on the stage, it was maybe a wrong decision to wait. But with the information that I had and with the knowledge that I had at the time, I think it was the only right and good decision I could make at the time.
I just find it odd because, I mean, normally in a straight time trial, Dumoulin against me, it would be pretty close. I mean, and Tom's next world champion. I mean, in time trial, so I wouldn't really fancy my chances against him.
50 metres, 25. Oh, Chris Froome! Knockout performance!
The way he rode that in terms of maximum average speed across the distance remaining, rather than, like I say, a big spike and then dying a death, actually made a big difference. Because the further it went on, he wasn't. He maintained that speed, or his pace all the way, as it were, rather than, like I say, slowing down and they start coming back at him. And I think psychologically there came a point where they realised, right, they're not going to catch him. And then in their heads it changes everything in terms of what they're riding for. And is Dumoulin going to pull Pinot along? Is Pinot going to pull Dumoulin along? How's that going to work? And I think that all came into the dynamics of the situation too.
I think because of what was happening in that group, and they were sort of trying to make decisions of wait for other riders to come and help or carry on pulling, I think inevitably that's what actually lost him the race. Whereas if he had actually just done all the work himself, he could have very well have caught me himself, I think. Six of the 7 Grand Tours I've won have been with Nico, and he's played a massive role in all of them. I mean, he almost every evening of every Grand Tour stage, he'd be in my room for the best part of an hour, either while I was at massage or even after dinner, just talking through the next day, and be bouncing scenarios off each other and ideas, and try and come up with a plan, a tactic for the next stage. And it was, I think Nico did have this amazing ability just to be able to make everyone feel included in the plan, and really brought the team together in that sense. I can't remember seeing Simon after the stage that day, if I'm honest. No, and I don't think he would have been up at the podium area. I'm not sure. But I did see him at some point, and I can remember him just saying he had nothing in his legs. He was just empty. I remember really feeling for him as well, because I know that feeling when you run out. There's nothing left, and that's where he was. He'd been so strong up until that point. So, I mean, obviously, as happy as I was that I was in the pink jersey, it's definitely I was disappointed for him on a personal level.
Going up the Finestre, I was just kind of in a world of my own, really, just surviving. But once I sort of come around and accepted that I'd just lost the race, I just not trying to exaggerate, but it was a wall of noise all the way, and that is something that I will cherish. I think that from that day, I think.
Yeah, we more or less all finished the stage together, it's funny that it was on the climb, the gravel climb. What do you call it? Finestre, yeah. And the last time I did that stage was the 20th stage of the Giro. Alberto won, and that was the stage where Alberto he cracked and just hung on to win. After the onslaught of Aru and Landa. And I remember, there the climb was more or less in the end of the stage. And I remember, hearing on the radio, like, oh, you're only a minute down. I was like, oh my God, no, this can't be happening. And then thankfully he hung on. And then the next time I came to the climb, it more or less happened again. But there was no avoiding that it had gone pretty pear-shaped, because by the top of the climb, we were more or less all together in the gruppetto. And then we just sort of, got on with it and got through, because there was still a mammoth of a stage left. It was hard to get through that stage. And especially, we all felt so sorry on Simon's behalf, because he just put everything into trying to win and do it in such a dominating fashion, which I think on the last climb, what was pretty cool to be a part of and to witness was that the Italians loved him. They almost cheered him on as if he was the new Pantani, because he'd just ridden so aggressively, which they just, to them, that was what meant the most. He just destroyed the stages that he'd won, and just, he just ripped it up on the climbs. He attacked. He won solo, and it had been from the beginning throughout the 3 weeks of the race. And I think they really respected that and appreciated that. So, on the last climb, when they could see that the Mali Rosa was in the gruppetto, they were like, oh my God, what's happened? But they all sort of, cheered him on. Were like, oh, grazie. And that was pretty cool. And made it a little bit less difficult to comprehend, but it was still a bit of a kick to the teeth.
We went into stage 20, and Tom was still hoping to go in and try and get the jersey back on that stage.
And Dumoulin has gone for a third time. Pulls away, and it's Froome who has to follow once more. Froome is reacting with a big tick in the box every time.
Yes, he is. He looks to be in control for the moment. And again, it's Froome who gives the attack here. And that tells that you have to be in good shape.
Oh, bad news for Tom Dumoulin. Bad news for Tom Dumoulin, who shakes his head. Has he given everything?
The next day I was just hanging on, and I tried to. I mean, I had some, but I was just cracked. The whole Giro, I was actually not feeling like I had something left, and especially in the last week, I was definitely struggling. So I just didn't have the strength to go for it.
And it is happy birthday to Mikel Iturralde, king of the mountain, once more on the final mountain stage of this Giro d'Italia.
And it caught up with us in the end. But that win of Mikel's the next day, I remember it was probably the longest 2 or 3 hours of my life when Simon did get dropped there on the Finestre, and we were riding at a sort of a pedestrian sort of pace, and guys were coming through and catching the group. And I remember thinking there in the car, what can we do tomorrow? And calling Mikel Neve back to the car and saying, Mikel, just switch off now and just start eating and drinking and start thinking about tomorrow. And this was, we rolled there for, I don't know how many, I think that group finished 20 minutes behind that day. And Mikel was already in Mikel's head. We go after the stage win the next day, and the guys were pretty down after winning four stages and having the jersey for so long. But they really busted their balls to get Mikel into the break that next morning, and he got in there, and then he was his class the way he demolished that breakaway to win our 5th stage. So it was a really nice way to finish off. That things don't always go your way, but you never give up.
Of course, everyone was a little bit down that we'd done so much and we'd just lost it. But I think that was just straight away that would pick me up.
I usually don't go behind the breakaways because I'm usually there behind with car 1, and I was behind Mikel for that stage, and it was he's cool as a cucumber and doesn't give anything away. But when he just went, and it was great because I had Jerry Ryan, the owner in the car with me, and he was a bit down as well. We just we'd come so close to winning the Giro. He changed all his flights back to go to Australia later, so he could be there till the end of the Giro, and then to win another stage. It was and especially on Mikel's birthday, it was nice.
I have good memories from that Giro. I don't have, I'm not bitter towards it that I lost the race. Of course, I would have liked to have won, but I mean, we had so much success there. Success that we'd never had before as a team. Up until that point, we'd won so many stages. I won 3 stages alone in the jersey. It was just it was a crazy tour, and that set me up to go on to the Vuelta. And and I think without those sort of experiences and those moments that I wouldn't have gone on to win the Vuelta. So I think I grew as a person, and I think we grew as a team from that.
He was so close, but to me, and I think everyone who did the Giro that year will agree that despite him not winning, I still look back as that being one of the most enjoyable special Grand Tours teams I've been a part of, because what did we win? We won 5 stages. But we had 6. No, we won 5. But once I I've lost count. But Simon was so good. Esteban, he won an Etna. Simon got the jersey. Esteban's, the surgeon who actually was one of the few surgeons who gave Esteban a chance of recovering from his massive crash. He was in the car that day, and then he wins the stage. And then Simon wins 3 stages, dominates as a team we rode. I think that was the first Grand Tour where we really rode as a team that could win a Grand Tour collectively, from start to finish. Me, Sam Bewley, Swine Tuft. It was Swino's last Grandie, and it was such a cool group to be a part of. And then, unfortunately, it all sort of went to shit with 2 days to go, and we thought we more or less had wrapped up. And still, then Nieve wins the stage the next day, which it has to be one of the most. There's a lot of fairy tale stories in this team. Heyman winning Roubaix, first Guerin's winning San Remo when the team started. There's so many amazing stories in the team results wise. But to me, then that was Nieve picking it up. The day after we'd more or less lost the Giro, and it was the last mountain stage. And Whitey sort of, he said to us, "Okay, listen, boys, we're not finished yet, and it's Nieve's birthday." I mean, if someone wrote that as a Hollywood movie, no one would believe it. The same as Heyman's win in Roubaix is like, yeah, okay, that's almost too good to be true. Like Leicester winning the Premier League. But so that was just, that was just an amazing day to finish the Giro off, and then you finish, and then the next day we go to Rome, where it's just complete chaos, and then it's just that was just that was an unbelievable Giro, and the Grand Tour that probably has changed me the most as a bike rider.
And barring any incident on the road, on the way to Rome tomorrow, Chris Froome will be the first British winner of the Giro d'Italia.
It would have been kind of special to win that Giro. So that would have been a good story, because then I would have never been at top shape and still won the Giro. That would have been a nice story. But no, so yeah, it is like it is. I think eventually I got second, and for me that was an honest show of my strength at Giro. I was just never able. I had nothing left.
We all desperately wanted him to win the Giro. You know, it was obviously he was so close, and it would have meant so much for the entire team and everyone involved. But no one finished in Rome, you know, feeling like we'd been robbed of something, or we knew it hadn't turned out the way we'd expected, but we still felt that we'd been part of a special grand tour, you know. And that to me is also something that I take it, you know, enjoy and means a lot in this team, is that you really value this team effort, and when things go as we plan, that sort of overshadows more or less everything else. And that also means, you know, when we sort of have to tackle a good bit of headwind, which we had to in those, you know, last 2 days. But then I must say that the fact that he then turns it around and wins the Vuelta is sort of, for me, I wasn't part of the Vuelta team, but that was actually, you know, it was, I think everyone had a sigh of relief, because Simon deserved to win, you know, the Giro as much as anyone else. So from then to win a Grand Tour a couple of months later was such a nice feeling, because, you know, you don't have to worry that it'll haunt him like, you know, a monkey on his back. He just sort of went home, did his homework, and then came back and won the Vuelta. It's like, oh, okay, there you go. You know, he is a Grand Tour winner, and he proves that in the same year, which is amazing.
Would you like to go back to the Giro?
I would at some point. I would. I mean, I don't think I'll do it in the immediate future while I'm so focused on trying to get a fifth Tour title. And also something I learned that in 2018 was doing the Giro before the Tour definitely took something away from me in the Tour. I mean, okay, I ended up third in Paris, but I just didn't have that freshness that I'd normally have coming into the Tour de France. Not to say that it's impossible, but it certainly does make winning the Tour that little bit harder. So I think for me, as long as the Tour is a really big objective, I think it's going to be hard to go to the Giro and give it everything just beforehand.
It's everything that you want bike racing to be, I think. That kind of, you know, breakaway against all odds. It's all or nothing. Can you do it? It seems like an impossible task, and all of a sudden you kind of get closer and closer and closer, and blimey, he goes and does it. You know, I think in that sense, the drama of it all is, puts it right up there. One of the most enjoyable stages ever, I think.
I think if I had to choose a one-day performance, I'd say that was definitely the day that I won the Giro on that one stage for sure. There aren't many Grand Tours where I can actually pick out one day that won the race other than that Giro. It was just such a also in terms of modern racing, you don't get those kind of attacks that necessarily work this day and age. I mean, you do see people going on long solo attacks, but 9 times out of 10 the bunch would swallow them up and spit them out again if they did that. But this was one day where sort of the bunch wouldn't exist after the Finestra, and that's what we had anticipated, and that played in my favor, and so it was just felt like old school bike racing, and pretty cool way to win the Giro.
The cycling podcast at Our Giro d'Italia is supported by Science in Sport. Science in Sport, fueled by science.
Big thanks to Science and Sport, our longest standing sponsor, who've been with us since the Giro in 2016 and are offering 25% off still to all our listeners with the code SISCP25 at scienceandsport.com. That's SISCP25 at scienceandsport.com for a whole 25% off your Science and Sport products. Chris Froome was fueled by science that day, wasn't he? Science and Sport, Supply, Team Sky, and they always said, Team Sky at the time, that fueling and his fueling strategy that day was a key component in pulling off what he did. But we heard there the voices of most of the main protagonists, and when they revisit the story a couple of years later, there are one or two interesting things that they say. I mean, Froome obviously took us through his whole race and the ups and downs. I was interested also to hear Tom Dumoulin talk about how below par he had felt at that Giro. He'd obviously won the previous year, and he never was quite at the same level, it seemed, in 2018. And he sort of chuckled to himself, thinking about how ridiculous or preposterous it would have been had he actually won that Giro, given the form he was in. And that puts that Stage 19 exploit in a slightly different light, because at the time, a lot of the questions were, this doesn't make sense. We've got Tom Dumoulin, one of the best time trialists in the world, chasing Chris Froome and not making any inroads. And that was that naked fact, sort of the idea that it was a man against man, in a way didn't make sense. But as Dumoulin explained there were a lot of other factors to it, the riders that he had with him, but also his own condition.
One thing that struck me, Rich, and it's easy to forget how sort of febrile the atmosphere was around Team Sky before that Giro, and Chris Froome, and with the positive test or the adverse analytical finding for salbutamol hanging over his head, and the following morning, it wasn't even the following morning, it started immediately. People who were already, dubious or sceptical about Team Sky, already starting to question Froome's performance. And as I say, it started immediately with, and there was this unfortunate, I think he thought it was unfortunate interview with George Bennett, where he drew a parallel with Floyd Landis. In fact, before we go on, I think we'll hear now. Let's hear me speaking to George Bennett the following morning, not so much retracting what he had said about Froome having done a Landis, but trying to put it in a bit of context.
Who was the last guy that made an epic comeback? Here's a question for you. I'm going to answer your question with a question. Tell me, who was the guy that made who was the last guy that made an epic comeback?
The ginger-haired and American and a Mennonite.
Who was it?
Floyd Landis.
Okay. I'm not saying he railed a bunch of gear I'm just saying that was the last comeback. And if we can't compare to another cyclist, we can't make a comparison to any cyclist in the last 20 years. Otherwise, that means you're just drawing. I didn't say Froome went out and railed a bunch of gear and came back and won the stage. I'm just saying he made a bigger comeback than bloody Easter Sunday. And I think I'm not saying at all. There's no innuendo. I'm not inferring anything. But if we can't make comparisons to cycling, we can't compare to Pantani, we can't compare to Merckx then, because we don't know what was going on there, and it's nothing to do with drugs or anything like that. But it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. People on Twitter, they want it to mean what they want it to mean, and they think that I'm in there batting for them.
So that was George Bennett trying to sort of distance himself from that comparison with Landis. But do you know what?
Distancing himself from himself.
Well, yeah, yes. We'd all like to do that
all
sometimes.
I misquoted myself.
Yes, yeah, pretty much. But it did strike me, chaps, listening to Chris Froome and Dave Brailsford talk about the strategy for that day and the way that Froome was going to manage his effort. There were echoes with, and all sort of caveats apply to what we know about Landis' performance and how it was fueled now. But I do remember after that, when people started to sort of deconstruct what Landis had done, that they talked in similar terms, and his coach talked in similar terms about how he tried to keep his effort pretty constant over. I can't remember how many passes he went over that day, Landis, on his own. And there was a lot of talk about nutrition and cooling as well. But certainly in the management of the effort, it came through very strongly listening to Brailsford and Froome there, how vital that was. There were no huge spikes apart from the first big attack, and that was key. And in contrast to that, Dumoulin didn't so much have a spike, but he did have a portion of the race where he wasn't able to put out the watts that he wanted because of the circumstances of the race. He was waiting for Seb Reichenbach, and then frantically tried to chase thereafter, but it really didn't work, and he probably would have been much better served. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, but he would have been much better served riding in a similar fashion to Froome, and then you probably wouldn't have seen the same gap certainly being opened on the flatter section of the course.
And I think if we reduce it down, we've not talked about Simon Yates yet, of course, but if we reduce it down to those two riders and what was unfolding on the day, it was a 2.5 hour effort that Froome made. As they said, he was used to making those efforts at threshold in training, but also the fact that Dumoulin lost all that time on the descent. He was on the back foot, and psychologically I think he was in a very difficult place, whereas Froome was getting all these kind of positive signals coming to him, and that was quite different to the Landis stage in a way. But the one thing I remember about the Landis stage was constantly going back for bottles and pouring them over his head. It was a cooling strategy that we hadn't really seen before, and it did highlight that it was what he was doing was a plan. And similarly, the echoes that we saw at the Giro in 2018 with Froome it was clearly a plan. The number of people they had out along the way handing out bottles and gels and so on told you that this was a thing that they had planned.
I think the thing that was really interesting listening to Froome talk about it and the Giro as a whole was just putting into context the different trajectories of Simon Yates kind of coming down and Chris Froome, sort of appearing to go the other way, because obviously he was having a much better second half of the Giro compared to the first half. They really kind of rode the perfect Giro between them, didn't they? Listening to Froome talk about how important that Zoncalon stage was that he won. If you think back to that day, Rich, we were up on the mountain, and to all intents and purposes, that was kind of Chris Froome's consolation prize for a disappointing Giro. He was out of the picture. He wasn't even in the top 10 at the start of that day. 3 minutes 20 behind Simon Yates. Pretty much any chance of the podium more or less had gone, because Pinot and Dumoulin were ahead of him as well. And the stage win was kind of like his, the booby prize in the raffle. I mean, not of course, but it was pretty much all that he could take from the race. And then we saw Yates chasing hard, limiting those seconds, keeping the any time lost to Froome to an absolute minimum. And at the time you thought, well, that is the ride of a champion-elect. He's not letting anyone have any leeway whatsoever. And that's what you get from watching the race from a detached perspective. And of course the riders know, don't they? And Froome picked up on that day that, perhaps that wasn't the smartest ride by Simon Yates. Perhaps that's the sort of thing that might come back and cost him later on in the race. And particularly when the next day the weather was bad and the legs felt heavy, and, all gathering positive signals that you were talking about in the context of that one stage 19. Froome was probably picking those up over the week leading up to it, and then when it came down to it, it really had nothing to lose going into stage 19. He could try something. If it didn't work, no one would criticise him for it. Simon Yates was obviously, coming down pretty dramatically, and it would only take one sort of strong gust to knock him over completely. And when you look back at the way Simon Yates rode the race, it's impossible to criticise him for riding aggressively and trying to get the job done in 2.5 weeks. But as we know, a Grand Tour is won over 3 weeks, not over 18 stages.
There was a great line from Chris Jensen there, just saying that the magic had gone. And they knew that after the previous night stage. That magic that had been there had just vanished, and they knew in their heart of hearts it wasn't coming back. And I listened back to the whole episode that we recorded that night, and we had Chris Jensen on then as well, and obviously resigned, and he actually sounded drunk. He sounded completely empty. And And there was even then, after the fact, there was a sort of a slight sugar coating of what had happened. Whereas now, he can admit that there was a sense in the team of imminent disaster with Yates going into that stage, and you got a real strong sense of that. But the other conversation we had at the time about Yates was wondering how he would cope with that, and a parallel that we drew was with Cadel Evans, who we featured in our Giro as well earlier, who went close in 2002 before blowing up spectacularly, and it took him another 9 years to finally win a Grand Tour. And we wondered whether whether it would be something that would haunt Simon Yates. And he obviously came back a few months later and won the Vuelta, which I think was a hugely important thing for him to do.
Another thing we spoke an awful lot about in that Giro, Rich, was how we felt that Mitchelton and Yates had created this sort of imaginary, this mental finishing line, which was the time trial, and how all of their energies and all of the questions of the journalists were focused on the time trial, because it was a game of tortoise and hare for the whole Giro. It was a question of how much can Yates gain before the time trial, which Dumoulin is then going to recoup or hope to recoup in the time trial. And you almost felt all of his sort of mental energy. And we might be wrong about this, but that was certainly our impression from the outside. And it was interesting to me to hear Dave Brailsford say in that package that they already felt that Yates was losing something in the time trial, or they looked leggy, when on the face of it, he actually had a very good result that day. And there weren't no signs, certainly not from the result, that he'd started to cave at that point. I mean, the other thing is, their policy throughout the race, Mitchelton's and Yates's, was strike while the iron is hot. And it's difficult to say, and no one will ever know for sure whether by economising and sort of deciding to maybe go at only 90% rather than 100% in the last 2 kilometres of the Zoncalon, whether you then carry over that sort of energy, that capital, onto another stage a week later. We simply don't know that. Maybe that's what Yates learned in the Vuelta, later in the year when he did win the Vuelta. The other thing to consider is that he'd not ridden the Giro before, and I remember speaking to him before that Giro and asking him about the climbs of the Giro, and him talking about how struck he was, having studied them a bit, by how long and how high the Giro climbs were. So he knew that in advance, but whether actually when he was on the road it came as a bit of a surprise to him, I don't know.
The winners get to write the history, of course, and Brailsford sort of suggested there that not the first time they come up with a plan like that, but maybe the first time it had come off. We met Brailsford that day, didn't we, Daniel? We were trying to get up to the buses to meet the riders coming back, and a policeman stopped us going the final part of the road. And we were standing on a roundabout on the sort of ledge just below where the buses were parked, when a bald figure appeared on a...
Not Napalm.
I was at home.
Not Lionel.
I was at home by that stage.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't you. On a Team Sky bike, and the bike belonged to Vasil Kirienka, who'd pulled out that day, and it was Dave Brailsford, and he was also not allowed up to the buses. So we stood and watched the stage on the phone with him, and Froome was just getting onto the lower slopes up to the finish, and it was still in the balance at that point. It wasn't clear. You didn't know whether Froome was going to pay for the effort he'd been making, and whether Dumoulin had been holding something back and might be able to close the gap enough. But we chatted to him quite a lot, and he told us in great detail, didn't he, about the plan they'd had and all the rest of it. But I think the caveat there is the winners do get to write the history, and it worked out very well for them. I think the point that Froome kept making about a Grand Tour being 3 weeks long, a few nights or a while ago now, we spoke about the 2016 Giro when Nibali closed a similar gap in terms of time to Stephen Kreuzwick over the last couple of days, and one thing you spoke about in that episode that we recorded after stage 19, Daniel, was how Mauro Vegni has tended to really stack the final few days of the Giro with really tough days with tough climbs.
And one thing that you probably wouldn't have appreciated the significance of it at the time, but second on that stage, leading in a few seconds ahead of Pinot and Miguel Angel Lopez and Tom Dumoulin, was Richard Carapaz, who jumped 4 places up the GC that night, finished 5th overall, and of course won the Giro the following year. And completely kind of overlooked at the time because it's not the story at all, but we probably should have known then that he had
a nice sort of easy ride that day, didn't he? Really, him and Miguel Angel Lopez. I don't think they contributed an awful lot to the chase.
True. Still got to be in there, though, haven't you? I mean,
he's still got to be there. A remarkable day, because Thibaut Pinot also, was there and was a key figure, and then the next day he wasn't there anymore. He'd fallen ill overnight. It was a remarkable day of devastation on the Giro, and again, listening back to that episode, that there was, a reluctance on our part too to lavish too much sort of praise or hyperbole on Froome's performance because of this asterisk, because of this cloud that was hanging over his participation in the Giro. And we knew that had he won the Giro and then been punished for a doping offence, that he wouldn't have lost the Giro, because the salbutamol case was an adverse analytical finding rather than a positive test. So any results he had while competing, he would have kept. But nevertheless, it would have made people feel very, very uncomfortable had he subsequently been punished for doping. As it was, the case was dismissed. But at the Giro, this was something that made us all uncomfortable and reluctant to to perhaps use the sort of language that we would have used had we been covering the Tour in 1949 and watching Fausto Coppi win his stage.
Just one final point, Rich, on Sky and how it all came together. What was conveyed to me very strongly listening to that as well was how difficult or how impossible it's going to be to replace Nicolas Portal. I don't think it was just sentimentality or nostalgia and Chris Froome being generous because Nicolas Portal tragically died recently. I think it's going to be difficult, and it's very rare to find a director sportif with the same kind of commitment and engagement as Portal had to Froome in particular. And if the Froome era is reaching its conclusion now at Team Sky Ineos, I think it's the fact that Portal's not there will be a big part of that because they were a duo.
Yeah, and that was Chris Froome's last Grand Tour victory. It's his most recent Grand Tour victory. It may well prove to have been his final Grand Tour victory, and what a win. But he did mention a slightly pointed comment in there, I thought was his remark that it affected his ability, his form at the Tour de France. I thought was an interesting thing to say. Dumoulin felt he was better at the Tour than at the Giro, but Froome clearly felt that it left him diminished at the Tour, which, given that his teammate Geraint Thomas won and he was third, I thought was quite interesting, because the sense you get from what Froome's been saying recently is how important it is to him to try and win a fifth Tour. That might have been his best chance that year, and the Giro may have cost him it. Who knows? I think we can say that the 2018 Giro was one of the certainly the most entertaining and dramatic Grand Tours we've all covered recently. This is probably, I don't know if it's our Queen stage, but this might be our Queen episode of Our Giro, Daniel. But there's a lot to talk about because it was a packed Giro. Not least, Lionel, you came up with a nickname for Simon Yates that got global attention. But what are your kind of standout memories from 2018?
Well, the trip to Israel was amazing. Your cross-country drive when we were in danger of missing the start in Beersheba. Do you remember that? Oh, just go that way. Just go that way. We'll just cut across the rocky...
It wasn't my cross-country drive. I think I made you drive.
Well, I was driving. You were forcing me to drive on we would have missed the stage entirely, wouldn't we, if we hadn't made that shortcut. I also remember, Daniel, after we'd made a relatively smooth crossing from Sicily to the mainland, we were rushing to find a pizzeria open for dinner. It was about 11 o'clock, wasn't it? And we drove down into the town and we saw the Team Sky Hotel, and we saw Chris Froome just arriving. Dave Brailsford and others had gone across by helicopter, but Chris Froome had missed the helicopter because he was still in dope control, waiting for his bladder to play ball and give him a sample. So he got to the hotel very late. And what do I remember from the rest of the middle week? It was just that sense of Simon Yates chiseling, slice of black pudding after slice of black pudding. But that nickname, I've told this story before about how it came about. It was to try and prove a small point to myself, really, which was in the light of your story about the mythical Zoncalon of the South, which started as an internet forum story that then captured some slightly niche media coverage, and then suddenly it was in sort of national cycling magazines. I gave myself the task, could I get this nickname wider coverage? And well, it was on the front of a Belgian newspaper, it was on BBC Breakfast, it was on Sky Sports, courtesy of our very good friend Orla Chenoy.
And about 48 hours later you were cowering because you thought this had spiraled out of control.
It was completely out of my control. People thought it was disrespectful. Some people did. I mean, it wasn't meant to be disrespectful at all. Simon Yates took it very well until he was just asked about it in a press conference just one time too many. But I gather he's tackled it on a Mitchelton Scott bit of media recently, and I mean, I'm not going to say he loves it, but there we are, the flying black pudding. He's got a nickname, whereas Adam hasn't. So, there you are.
I'll just give one memory of that Giro, and it involves another nickname which has also stuck, but slightly less well known. Julien Pinot, Thibaut's brother and coach, to this day, I refer to him as Cannoli, and he very much enjoys that and revels in that. Cannoli being the conical ricotta-filled desserts that he was stuffing his face with one morning in Sicily. And we still have a tradition, Julien and I, whenever he comes across cannoli or cannoli, he sends me a picture and very theatrically poses with one, and I do likewise.
I should just explain, there'll be listeners who aren't from the UK or who aren't aware that Simon and Adam Yates are from near Bury in Lancashire, which is famous for its black pudding. Black pudding being in France it's boudin noir. What is it in Italy? Do they have... Oh, it's Sanguinaccio Volante. Sanguinaccio, of course it is. That was the nickname. Sanguinaccio Volante, the flying black pudding. It's basically pig's blood sausage. Absolutely delicious stuff. Sounds awful.
Yum. Well, my standout memory is actually right at the end. As we were wrapping up, we missed the final stage, but Daniel and I were staying in St Vincent, and we woke up in the morning to discover a huge nail in our car tire that had caused it to puncture, and there weren't the right tools in the boot to remove the wheel, and we were well and truly stuck, weren't we, Daniel, until some old man appeared hobbling across the road. You wrote about this in our book, still available.
Magic tool.
He was a miracle worker. He had a little sort of Swiss Army knife in his pocket that he pulled out. He was about 80. It was quite embarrassing, really. But he worked his magic. He removed the wheel. We put the spare wheel on, maximum speed 80 kilometers an hour or something, or 50, and made it to Malpensa about 25 minutes before your flight took off, Daniel.
And I was flying to Mallorca, and you had to take my luggage, give my luggage to my girlfriend, who then joined me a few days later in Mallorca.
Yeah, you never told me what you had put in those trainers.
Illegal.
You never told me what was in those trainers. But anyway, that was a standout memory. That left quite an impression on me. It was a great race. There was so much going on. We should wrap things up. We're back tomorrow for one final push to Milan. What have we got coming up in tomorrow's episode? I'm looking forward to it enormously.
Well, someone else can do this because I've listened to the interviews and it all makes me very uncomfortable. I might skip tomorrow's episode.
Well, let's leave it there. Let's not say what it is and let people imagine what it might be. But I've got a theory about this, Daniel. I'll expand on that in tomorrow's episode.
The problem is wincing doesn't come across very well in a podcast, does it? People will just have to imagine Daniel wincing.
Free audibly winced. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, that's all coming tomorrow. You'll have to tune in to find out what exactly. That's all for now. Thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lionel.
Thanks, Rich.